8th. This meeting is being held pursuant to the order of reference of January 25th, 2021, and the order of reference sent to the committee on March 10th, 2021. Committee is beginning its study of Bill 216, an act to amend the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development Act. With us today, we have the pleasure, of course, to welcome MP Louis Plamondon. Welcome, Mr. Plamondon. Glad to have you here. And of course, Mr. Perron as well. We'll open it up. Mr. Plamondon, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, it is with great excitement that I am here today. What is happening is historic, since this is the first time that such a bill has been tabled. And here we are now in committee to debate it, and I hope that the debates will show the importance of voting for this bill. Bill C-216 is very simple. It adds, within the mandate of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the obligation to fully respect the supply management system by removing the ability of negotiating away its principles during international trade negotiations in the future. Therefore, the minister cannot sign a trade agreement that would increase the tariff rate quota, we call these the quotas, for supply-managed products, and or reduce the applicable tariff when imports exceed the quota. It's highly unusual that C-216 is so controversial, since it has been the subject of several unanimous consent votes since the first motion on the subject was tabled in the House of Commons on November 22, 2005, by my former colleague, André Bellavance. Then, following each free trade agreement, the Bloc wanted to confirm Parliament's support for supply management by the means of a motion seeking unanimous consent. Each time, MPs supported the motions, and each time, the government did quite the opposite. This is why it is important to have a bill and not a motion. In the context of the start of the NAFTA negotiation, the Bloc also tabled a motion so that the government would protect supply-managed markets. This was on September 26, 2017. But just over a year later, the Liberal government reneged on its word by signing CUSMA, an agreement to replace NAFTA. This was on November the 30th, 2018. Then, in the context of the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, the Bloc Québécois tabled a motion calling for the protection of the supply management system in this agreement. This was on February 7th, 2018. And 1 month later, on March 8th, 2018, the Liberal government reneged on its word by signing the new TPP-GP. Then, on the day of the end of the third reading debate of the Comprehensive and Progressive on the CPTPP implementation bill, the Bloc sought and obtained unanimous consent from parliamentarians that the government must fully compensate supply-managed producers for the gaps in all three agreements, and this was on October 5th, 2018. The bill, even more significant than a motion, a majority of MPs and MPs from all parties voted in favor of the principle of Bill C-216 on March the 10th. I would simply like to remind members of the committee what a second reading vote means in procedural terms. When a member stands in the House to support a bill at second reading and to refer it to a parliamentary committee, in essence, he or she is supporting the principle of the bill, its idea and its general scope. As members of the committee, you are therefore bound by this vote. According to Chapter 16 of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice Manual, written by Marleau Montpetit, the edition of year 2000, it says, and I quote, "If the bill has already been read a second time, the committee is bound by the decision of the House and may not make any changes to the bill that would contradict the principle of the bill. End of quote. We are not here to debate the pros and cons of supply management. The principle has already been voted on in the House. We are here to ask whether Canada should protect certain parts of its agriculture sector from foreign competition, and this within the rules of the World Trade Organization agreements. The supply management system does respect the rules of the World Trade Organization agreements. We are not here to question whether we have the right to do so. We already know it. The provisions were included in the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, even before the creation of the WTO. These are provisions that are used by most countries. We are not alone in protecting certain products. All countries do this. And these same countries reproach us because since these products have always been protected, they want to essentially take over what is left of our milk, egg, and poultry markets. So what do we want to protect them from? From unfair competition in the first place. Indeed, our main partners, the United States, violates several international trade rules while asking us to always give them increased access. They illegally subsidize their agriculture sector to the tune of several billions of dollars per year, which reduces the production costs of producers who can sell locally and elsewhere at a lower price. This is strictly prohibited by the WTO. They constantly challenge aspects of our agricultural and forestry policies, and we've seen this recently with milk quotas and softwood lumber, despite previous decisions rendered by the Court of International Trade. They are one of the most protectionist countries in the G20, but they are also one of the most greedy in terms of demanding market access. Other agreements are being discussed, for example, Mercosur, Latin American countries, and it is inevitable that other agreements will be up for discussion in the future. I would like to remind you that these agreements did not negotiate supply management, so it's possible to do so. At present, supply management has been severely weakened by the latest concessions, and these sectors must reorganize. We cannot allow the U.S. or any other country to force us to abandon our own agricultural policies and practices. I don't know about you, but I find it completely absurd that one state would allow another state to dictate what can and cannot be imported and at what price. And that is what is happening with the new NAFTA. Quebec and Canada are exporting nations. This is undeniable, and there is no attempt here at becoming more protectionist. What we want is to be able to maintain a system that worked for nearly 50 years and that still allows us to offer reasonable incomes all along the production chain so that families can stay in our regions and thrive. Canada has and must have diversified policies and strategies so that producers can live off the land, feeding our people while using the agricultural model of their choice. The producers, under supply management, and even the entire agricultural sector, whether it be the CFA or the UPA, are simply asking that we preserve what is theirs, their agricultural model. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Committee members, Mr. Berthold for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank my colleague. Hello, Mr. Plamondon. Thank you for the work that he's been doing for years at the House of Commons. And I have many questions to ask him today. First of all, I would like to thank my colleague for his initiatives and the intent of this bill. It's something that's dear to the heart of producers. That is, when I talk about supply management, that says essentially that in the next trade agreement signed with other countries, there shouldn't be any new concessions with regards to supply management. And I do share this position. And it's a position of my party. It's a commitment that has been repeated by all the party leaders. It's been repeated since the catastrophic agreement signed with the U.S. I think that this is how we can qualify it. And we're wondering, I mean, there's a quota, but then we ceded our sovereignty with regards to exportation of powdered milk. And so there's a lot of work that remains to be done. My question, do you trust the Liberals so that they will respect this bill if it is passed? Answer, whether the government be conservative with the European trade agreement or that was begun by the Conservatives with regards to Trans-Pacific, and the Liberals eventually signed this, there's always been gaps ever since these 3 large trade agreements have been signed. And I've oftentimes heard the Minister of Agriculture of the Liberal Party say supply management was created by Liberals and we're not going to touch it. We were going to defend this. But I don't know if him defending means to introduce gaps or to cede 3%, 4%, that this is acceptable. It seems to be the case because he was solemnly committed to defending, but I guess not defending to 100%. So now it seems that with a bill, there will be an obligation to respect the act. But a motion is a pious wish, but it's different. So yes, I hope that the government will respect the majority vote of the House. Madam Chair, and to the MP, does he agree that each trade agreement is sent to the House for approval, as he mentioned in the case of TPP that was renegotiated by the Liberals? And all of these agreements are submitted, then there's a bill that's implemented, and then existing bills or existing laws are modified. So a bill or a motion, there's nothing that would stop a government, if concessions are to be made, to continue to bring forth amendments. It's unfortunate, but this seems to be reality.
That's a possibility, but I think they would hesitate because the Union des producteurs agricoles and the Canadian Agricultural Federation put a lot of pressure on all MPs to tell them this bill we wanted, and as this bill is passed and then contradicted by another legislation that would not please the agricultural sector, and the risk would be very great for whatever party was in party. Even if I recognize that Liberals easily or quickly change legislation. But you admit that even if this bill is passed, it could be changed by another bill if the government of the day chooses to. Yes, but I have the choice of saying I won't do anything or I will do something. And I chose to do something by tabling C-216. I know there was a lot of pressure on the government. It's no longer just a motion. It's legislation. And if the government tries to change it through another bill, well, we will get up and we will defend it. But if I say we will let the party in power to free to do what it wants, then they can do whatever they want with free trade bills. But it's a little bit more difficult if it's an act rather than a motion.
Mr. Sarai, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the the member, Mr. Palamadan, for his passion on this this topic. We've heard this, and ever since I got elected in 2015, I've heard what supply management is, and even before that. And I, though have no dairy farms in my riding, I have many very close by in Surrey. So thank him for his passion, specifically for the dairy sector, but also the other supply management sectors. We are here today to study C216, an act to amend the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. Can you explain the pros and cons of this bill? What would be the positive and negative impacts, actual versus perceived? Mr. Palamadan?
Oui, merci pour votre question.
Well, thank you for your question. In my presentation, I mentioned quickly the consequences. It limits the government's power, or the minister's power, to make whatever concession during international negotiations. I mentioned that we've negotiated 16 agreements without ever touching supply management. Each country has its own products that they want to protect, and us too. We want to protect products and our unique ways of operating. So that's the purpose of the bill. It's to ensure that this supply management system, which has been in place for 50 years, be protected in future negotiations. What is done. There have been breaches. That's unfortunate. But for future negotiations, like the one that will start with Latin America, for example, Great Britain with the Brexit became independent from Europe. So it is negotiating a free trade agreement. But when we conceded 3% to Europe, Great Britain was part of the system, of the European system. So we don't want it to get another piece. We don't want another breach for Great Britain. It has to ask Europe for its share because it was negotiated for all of Europe. So there are very firm positions that negotiators have to take. Simply, if they go to to the negotiation table and they put supply management on the table, negotiators have to say, no, I can't. That would be illegal. So let's talk about something else. The principle is quite simple.
Cash receipts. I believe last year in 2020, there were $72.2 billion, an increase of 8.3% from 2019 when there were 66 billion. This includes market receipts from crop and livestock sales, including all sectors under supply management and not. This is a significant power engine of our economy. Can you tell us the best tools and strategies for growth of the agriculture sector?
Well, the tools that we have are pretty solid. I think that as for exports of pork and beef or even poultry, we can export on safe markets that function very well. There were some problems in the past, but things have settled. The price is good. The price of wheat, we export a lot of wheat, and the demand is increasing. It will be used for green gas. So we can export, and protecting some sectors in no way harms exports, in my view, and that's why the Canadian agricultural sector is doing very well right now.
On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello to all my colleagues and to my colleague Louis, and thank you for this bill, which I think will solve long-standing problems. Of course, nothing is perfect. There's no magic solution. It's better to have legislation, a legal basis, than to not have one. That's obvious. And there may be other little things that need to be corrected before I ask my question to Mr. Plamondon. First, C216 is a mandate. It forbids making certain commitments for Canada, and that comes into play before the negotiations. And there's no. It's important to mention there'd be no subsidies for production. So here's a rhetorical question. When I hear some opponents say, I think when it's that everybody believes in supply management, but there are not too many people who practice it. When they say that it could hurt other sectors during negotiations, some MPs will say, I'm 100% for supply management, and I promise to protect it. But when we're negotiating, we can't cut ourselves from other possibilities. So I will protect it, but I reserve the right to make some breaches. Isn't that not a good justification for the bill? Yes, what producers want is that supply management not be used as a bargaining chip during negotiations. So we will make a breach, but you will allow a certain export. The aim of the bill is to prevent this kind of compromise. 16 trade agreements have been negotiations without touching supply management. So we can negotiate with other countries if we're clear from the outset we're not touching supply management. The law forbids it, and that's the importance of this bill. And then negotiators who don't consult Parliament every day, they come to an agreement. They say we gave this and that, and there's a little breach because they have the power to do it. But if they couldn't, if they weren't allowed to do it, we would end up with something which would be quite acceptable, but would not undermine 50 years of supply management. Earlier, you were answering a question. You were asked if you trust Liberals to implement this legislation. You said you trust them even less if there isn't a law where they can negotiate. There are no legal obligations, and you have to believe what they say. Of course, a law can be abolished. That's normal in a democracy. But this seems obvious, but I think it deserves saying, is passing a bill making it more difficult to make breaches because the government will have to take the blame for not for abolishing it. Yes, when you want to abolish legislation, you have to have good arguments and you have to have the support of the sector because it's something that they've asked for. But when I was saying that Liberals were say they're very committed to supply management before the negotiations with Europe and Trans-Pacific, and especially with the United States, I heard the minister say, we put in place supply management and we will always defend it. But defending it, did it mean defending it 100% or defending it with a few little concessions, a little 3% here, 3% there, another 3%, and you're up to 10% of producers' income that disappears. And that makes all of the difference, especially for the young producers who want to start producing milk. That can be the difference between succeeding and failing. I see that the chair turned on her microphone.
Yes, on to Mr. Blakey for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Plamondon, it seems to me that we're in a funny situation. We have a government that says that it will never cause another breach in the supply management system, but who says at the same time that it doesn't want legislation that says that it can't because they want to keep their options open. And they're afraid that if breaching supply management is not an option, we might not be able to conclude a trade agreement with new partners. So as Canadians, as Quebecers who depend on supply management sectors, how are they supposed to understand this tension between a government who says that it doesn't want to breach supply management, but who will do it, and who says at the same time that it wants to keep all of its options open? Yes, that's a problem. But first, I'd like to thank you because I listened very closely your speech during the first hour of debate on the CIIT, and I was very impressed by your performance, and especially by the arguments that you brought in support of supply management. The problem with the Liberals that you mentioned, yes, it's always a political problem, but more and more, they've felt the pressure from the agricultural producers. But if they break their promise, it would be very costly for them, because when we meet supply managed producers, they're very hopeful that this bill would enable them to invest because they won't fear another breach that might threaten their viability. A lot of producers are talking about making new products. So there's something happening in the CIIT where producers got together to do R&D to perform better and to develop products that the public wants, that the consumer wants. And when you're sure that your supply management is safe, well, you can think of developing new products and that stimulates the economy. Some people say that free trade is a federal welfare, whereas there's no subsidy, and that people will be passive. Of course not. There is a lot of a dynamic development of cheeses, for example. I tasted cheese from your region that are extraordinary, and we can compete Europeans. So we have a very dynamic system, and I don't see how Liberals could say, yeah, we said yes, but, we really meant no. We're ready to concede some breaches. We're ready to negotiate. I think it would be very difficult. Anyways, in any case, the bill is one other obstacle to stop them from carrying on like they do now.
Another argument that we hear often is that we'll never be able to conclude another free trade agreement if we have such a restriction that's adopted. But we are other red lines for national security, for example, or the cultural exemption. And this has not prevented us from signing free trade agreements. Why do you think that
the Liberals and the others think that it's different in this case and that we will not be able to function with such an exemption. This argument is not good because of the examples you gave and because of the fact that all countries have some important products that they protect in all agreements. They say this is something that we can't move on. Before negotiating, we must be clear. We must say supply management cannot be changed. So that's where we start negotiations. It's settled.
But I need to get on to Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Plamondon. It's great to have you here. Huron Bruce is a rural riding in southwestern Ontario. It's on the west coast, right against Lake Huron, and some of the most productive farmland in North America with some very high yields. And Huron County is the fastest growing county in all of Ontario for dairy liter production. So we're growing at 6% per year for sure. And in spite of some difficult circumstances with COVID and trade deals, some trade deals, etc. My question to you, and if you mentioned this in your opening comments, I apologize, but I want to ask you about your thoughts on the United States potentially entering into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Just any thoughts on that?
Oui, mais
Yes. I know there were many comments, many articles on this. It's a possibility with the arrival of Mr. Biden. Would it have an effect? Certainly, if they want part of what was conceded in the Trans-Pacific Agreement, that's where they could have some of the advantages, but new advantages would not be conceded by Canada. And Marc-André Roche, who is with me today, perhaps could give a more detailed answer. Marc-André, are you there? Yes, can you hear me? Okay. What one must know is that when Canada made the first concessions in the Trans-Pacific Agreement, the United States were part of it. And the concessions made at that time were for the territory, including the United States. When the United States left, they asked for more concessions just for them. Of course, if they come back to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they'll have to agree with Australia, New Zealand to share quotas or to take for them part of the quotas conceded in the agreement. But there's no reason to concede more since the volumes were agreed on at the time when the United States were part of the agreement.
As a red line, in my view, on future negotiations with TPP with the United States. One other question I wanted to ask you is in regard. It's a long outstanding ask that the chicken farmers have had in relation to the USMCA trade deal, and it is to have a enhanced and beefed up presence with the border, CBSA. That was part of their compensation out of the USMCA deal, was that they really weren't asking for direct support. They were asking for maybe some green and innovative ways for on-farm and maybe for some tightening up and more scrutiny at the border for US that may not be getting spent hens or something across the border in an unfair way. Also, I understand as well that there have been cases where tanker trucks come across the border and say it's goat milk, only to be tested and found out that it's actually dairy cow milk, clear violation of terms. So I just wondered about your thoughts about maybe some outstanding dollars and commitments to CBSA. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying they need more dollars to do their jobs. Any thought about that?
I agree with you. The examples you gave are clear. I met with chicken farmers and other supply managed producers who gave us incredible examples of all the tricks that are used to cheat a bit and sometimes a lot on the free trade agreement. It was the case for a while with these cheese sticks. In 2008, 2009, in Parliament, there was a debate on this, and we had managed to oppose the United States. But of course, the solution is to have at customs stronger services with a major investment from on the part of the government to hire staff, but also to buy electronic equipment in order to be able to detect those who cheat the system.
Well, thank you very much to the member for being here today and for presenting his private members bill on a very important subject. I'm not a farmer directly, but the Sheehan history is one that's shared by a lot of people in Canada. My ancestors came across on the boat during the famine, and my great-grandfather's parents both died on the boat coming across. He was adopted by Quebecois. So he was allowed to keep his name. He was raised on a farm and whatnot, and then eventually he found himself out west running his own farm and got wiped out by hail and came back to Northern Ontario. So this subject is near and dear to my family.
I'm going to do it now.
So thank you very much for your private members bill, and just for clarity. When this did come to Parliament, the Liberals did support 216 because this is very important to the Liberals, and I'm sure the member will know who voted and who didn't vote for it, as all of us that have had private members bills before certainly do. And I can't speak for the other parties and who voted for what, but we believe strongly in supply management systems. It's critical to farmers across this great country in Quebec, and especially during the pandemic, and we'll always defend it. So, I just want to make, clear that we've also said that we will not grant any further market access to supply management sectors in future trade negotiations, and have committed $1.75 billion in compensation to our dairy farmers. So, I just wanted to put that on record. But my question is, farming receipts, including supply managed areas, dairy and whatnot, all farming is up 8.3% during 2020, which I found very amazing during the pandemic. Does the member have any other suggestions how we could strengthen the farming sector? So I'll leave it there for questions about how we further strengthen the farming sector.
Il y aurait bien des programmes.
Many programs could be improved, and farmers have been asking for it. I'll stick with the topic of supply management because this is a stability that we want. That is to have a guarantee that if farmers invest, there will not be a concession that will make their revenues diminish by 3%, especially for those who want to grow. And then there's also succession in agriculture, because with one of the last concessions, there were negative effects for some farms in Ontario and elsewhere in Canada, because there are supply managed sectors everywhere in Canada. So it was very difficult, because if you cut your revenues by 10% for anyone in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada, this can be a dramatic difference. So this is what producers want. They want stability. In other programs, for development programs, the agricultural industry has asked for different things that would be possible to do on the short term. The government does not seem to be listening, and I hope that with the election that's coming up, there will be things done. But in the area of agriculture in general, things have been going well. There was nearly an 8% growth rate, but we have to make sure that this can continue. In the supply managed sectors, there's no subsidies. What we ask for is protection.
Thank you very much for that very, very important answer.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jan, you got about 35 seconds.
Okay, I just again would like to say that you know, the regional development agencies. I'm parliamentary secretary for FedNor. We have DEC. Some of the smaller dairy farms. Again, you know, I know we've helped different agricultural sectors. So again, if there's any ideas that the member has, in particular for small and medium-sized farms with smaller heads, you know, to perhaps delve into that now or to put into writing later, because that is a big question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheehan. Now we're going to thank Mr. Plamondon for coming, Mr. Perron as well. Thank you all for being here. We are going to suspend the meeting now. We have many witnesses coming up in part 2 that we need to hear from. So I will suspend the meeting for 2 or 3 minutes while we get our witnesses tested. Thank you very much again, Mr. Plamondon, for coming. back to order. Welcome to all of our witnesses to have accepted today. As an individual today, we have Patrick Talon, Professor of Constitutional Law, Faculty of Law, University Laval. From the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, Dan Darling, the President, and Claire Chiteau, Executive Director. From the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, we have Bob Lowe, President, and Fawn Jackson, Director, International Government Relations. And from the Dairy Farmers of Canada, Pierre Lemperon, President, and Daniel Gobiel, Les Producteurs de Latte de Quebec, President. Mr. Talion, I'll open the floor for you. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you to the members of this committee for the invitation. As far as my presence here, I would like to distinguish two aspects of my testimony. So I'm here in my personal capacity as a citizen supporting C-216 and also as an expert in constitutional law. And in my personal capacity as a citizen, it seems obvious to me that there are interests to protect strategic interests for Quebec and Canada, and the health crisis has clearly demonstrated this. Food independence or the importance of local production of food is more than ever crucial. But above everything, I'm here today as an expert in constitutional law. My message is quite simple and can be summarized as follows. It is legally possible to increase the role of Parliament in this debate, and this is why we must distinguish the fundamental issue of the ability of Parliament to impose itself in this debate and the political will to do so. The law should not be used as a false pretext. It is that there is between the executive and legislative a complex play, and sometimes it is better to give more room for maneuver to the executive branch because decisions have to be made quickly. There has to be some flexibility, and sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes you need less flexibility for the executive branch, and the Parliament needs to be able to set limits. In both cases, it always comes back to the legislator to determine what is the limit. It's up to parliamentarians to determine issues for which their power of having the last word, their parliamentary sovereignty should prevail. Now, does this merit increased protection, more parliamentary debate, or should we give a blank check to the executive branch? This is a question of political opportunism. As a citizen, I would say yes, but as a constitutional law expert, I think that there is no doubt that procedurally, legally, constitutionally, it is possible for the Parliament to limit the actions of the executive branch. The Parliament already does this through Section 10 of the Foreign Affairs Department Act, and with Bill C-216, it would go a step further, bring extra specification, extra clarity, and also in the formulation of some limits to action. And we always have to be aware that it's not because the Parliament is involved in these decisions that everything automatically becomes fixed for all eternity. Of course not. Parliament remains sovereign. In my opinion, Bill C-216 seeks to democratize the debate so that if interests linked to supply management have to be called into question, a parliamentary debate will be held, and the bill will impose that parliamentarians will be given a voice on these issues. So parliamentarians will always be free to come back on these issues, but at least they will have, in a sense, imposed relevant, useful politically astute limits to the work of the executive branch. So to conclude, the Parliament can regulate the exercise of the minister's statutory powers under Section 10 of the Foreign Affairs Department Act, and then it's a political choice. As an expert, the procedural way does exist. As a citizen, I think it's important to use this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tallien. On to the Canadian Agri.
Merci. Maintenant, l'Alliance canadienne du commerce agroalimentaire.
Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Dan Darling, and I am president of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, or CAFTA. As you know, we are the voice of Canadian agri-food exporters, advocating for a more open and fair international trading environment for agriculture and agri-food. Today, I am here to impress upon the committee that Bill C-216 should not be supported by parliamentarians. Let me start by stating that our comments stem from decades of expertise in international trade policy and trade agreements, whether multilateral, regional, or bilateral. We represent 90% of farmers who depend on trade as well as producers, food processors, agri-food exporters. We want to grow the economy through better access to foreign markets. Our members include beef, pork, grain, cereals, oilseeds, pulses, soybeans, canola, as well as the malt, sugar, and processed food industries. Collectively, we account for over 90% of Canada's agri-food exports and support about 1 million jobs in urban and rural communities across Canada. A significant portion of these sales and jobs would not exist without the competitive access to world markets. That is why we are urging committee members to carefully review Bill C-216 and Canada's wider strategic interests in mind, and in export-dependent sectors such as agri-food. It has far-reaching implications that could very much have unintended consequences on an export-dependent country like Canada. We are deeply concerned about legislating an exclusion of products or sectors from trading negotiations, a move that would damage relationships with key trading partners and jeopardize the foundation of our economic engine as a trading nation. At the very least, Bill C-216 not only contradicts trade rules, but is also counterproductive to our interests and effectively ties the hands of our negotiators before negotiations even begin. As such, it would seriously constrain the government's ability to negotiate the best deal for Canada and in turn for Canadian agri-food exporters and workers. The bill is therefore detrimental to our ability to generate growth and and protect jobs in every region of the country. This is no small sector to disrupt. In addition to wider agricultural industry, which is already a key economic driver in every region of the country, food manufacturing supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in cities and towns across Canada. In fact, food manufacturing sector is bigger than automotive and aerospace sectors combined. Therefore, such legislation would set a dangerous precedent, inviting other sectors and trading partners to seek exclusions from trading negotiations. It is not unreasonable to recognize how encouraging countries to avoid making significant concessions on their end would only lead to less ambitious, less commercially meaningful outcomes across all economic sectors. Ultimately, by making it impossible for partners to even contemplate a win, big or small, in these sectors, Bill C-216 would reduce opportunities to be invited to a seat at the table of various bilateral and multilateral negotiations and put Canada on a collision course with the United States and many other trading partners, especially when it's time to review, extend, or modernize existing trade agreements. Increasing the leverage of other trading nations threatening to rip up trade deals threatens Canada's relationships. erodes badly needed stability, predictability, and jeopardizes the very foundation of our trade-reliant economy. One lesson we should learn from the renegotiation of NAFTA is that we should not take for granted existing FTAs for granted. We should also fully expect that in the post-pandemic global economy, competition is going to be fiercer than ever before. Now, it is not time to be erecting new barriers to trade or putting our country at a strategic disadvantage. In conclusion, we ask that you oppose Bill C-216. Doing so will allow Canada to preserve its robust ability to negotiate comprehensive trade agreements and help secure Canada's long-term economic success in the broad national interest in mind. Thank you for your time. Merci beaucoup. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darling. On to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Bob Lowe, and I'm the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. And with me today is Fawn Jackson, our Director of Policy and International Affairs. CCA is pleased for the opportunity to provide input on Bill 216. CCA represents almost 60,000 beef producers from coast to coast. The beef industry is a significant driver of our economy as Canada's second largest single source of farm income, contributing $21.8 billion to gross domestic product at market prices and supporting just under 348,000 full-time equivalent jobs. Key to the beef industry's success in Canada is free and open trade, with 50% of Canadian beef being exported around the globe. A thriving beef industry generates considerable economic, environmental, and social opportunity and benefits for Canada. Export Development Canada reported that Canada's agricultural exports are growing 3 times faster than the overall Canadian average, confirming that agricultural products are a net cash generator for Canada's economy and an area for continued growth. Despite the significant hardships brought to the beef industry from COVID-19, the value of trade was up 1.4% in 2020 over 2019, setting a new record in export value. Having a record year during the difficulties of COVID-19 demonstrates the resiliency and important role that agriculture trade plays in Canada's green recovery. CCA is a member of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance and is in support of their position regarding Bill C-216. As they have outlined in their brief, as well as their presentation today, Bill C-216 will have significant negative consequences from a trade policy, trade negotiating, political, and an economic perspective. Along with CAFTA, CCA is deeply concerned about this bill and the political legislation to include products and sectors from trade negotiations, a move that would damage relationships with key trading partners and jeopardize the foundation of our economic engine as a trading nation. Bill C-216 is counterproductive to Canada's economic interests and effectively ties the hands of our trade negotiators before negotiations even begin. This would severely constrain the Government of Canada's ability to negotiate the best deals for all of Canada, including Canadian beef producers. Bill C-216 would be detrimental to our ability to generate growth and support the hundreds of thousands of jobs across Canada. And I'll repeat what Dan said, almost verbatim. This bill also sets a dangerous precedent, inviting other sectors and trading partners to seek exclusions from trade negotiations, which would lead to less ambitious and less commercially meaningful outcomes across all economic sectors. We strongly encourage members of Parliament to oppose Bill C-216 to allow Canada to preserve its robust ability to negotiate comprehensive trade agreements that help secure Canada's long-term economic success with the broad national interest in mind. CCA appreciates the opportunity to provide input on Bill C-216 and will be pleased to provide any further information that the committee may seek. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lowe. On to the Dairy Farmers of Canada, please.
Bonjour, au nom de tous les producteurs.
Hello. On behalf of all Canada's dairy farmers, I thank you for the invitation. My name is Pierre Lampron. I'm the president of Dairy Farmers of Canada and a dairy farmer from Saint-Boniface, Quebec. I'm accompanied by Daniel Gobin, president of the Dairy Farmers of Quebec. We represent producers' families on over 10,000 farms throughout Canada. The Canadian dairy sector, as well as the poultry and egg sectors, are regulated by the supply management system. Unfortunately, the system has been weakened by recent trade agreements. One of the pillars of supply management is import control to effectively regulate supply and demand. Providing access to our domestic market erodes the system. All political parties in the House of Commons recognize the importance of supply management and have committed to no further market concessions in future trade agreements to protect supply management. Bill C-216 would mandate that Canadian negotiators hold to this unanimous commitment. It is time for political support to be translated into concrete action and to completely exclude dairy products from future domestic market access concessions. Dairy farmers recognize the importance of international trade to the Canadian economy. We understand the need for Canada to seek out and sign new trade agreements. However, concessions in the dairy sector have been used as leverage in Canada's 3 recent trade agreements. The concessions in all 3 agreements represent an annual loss of $450 million for dairy farmers. In addition to the access granted under the WTO, almost 18% of our domestic production will be given to dairy farmers in other countries. Their products will replace those made with Canadian milk on our grocery shelves. Committee members, there is only so much that one sector of the economy can take, and we've had enough. We've had enough of our sector being sacrificed to strike trade agreements. In any future trade negotiations, our government must stop sacrificing sectors under supply management. I'll now turn the floor over to my colleague, Danielle. Thank you, Pierre. The government's compensation package does not repair the long-term damage caused by trade agreements. Instead of compensation, dairy families would have preferred that no concessions had been made with regards to our sector. Concessions with promises of compensation are not a model for trade negotiations. Trade agreements can be reached without sacrificing the dairy sector. Since 1997, Canada has negotiated 12 trade agreements with 15 countries without access to our domestic market. The most recent trade continuity agreement with the UK proves that Canada can conclude free trade agreements with other countries without providing new access to the Canadian domestic market. This must be the norm for the future. Free trade agreements should never be negotiated at the expense of one particular sector. The desire of some sectors to expand their markets to exporting products is legitimate and should be a priority for the government. But the interests of one sector should never be sacrificed to the benefit of another. A vibrant dairy industry means what during a pandemic? It means increased food security, jobs, better access to rural infrastructure, and a strong economy that benefits all Canadians and all regions. Every time additional access to our domestic market is given away, the impact is felt by dairy families throughout the country. The only viable model for the future is the firm exclusion of our domestic dairy market from trade negotiations. Bill C-216 would reinforce this commitment. Supporting Bill C-216 and removing domestic market concessions sends a strong signal. We believe the choice is clear. This would send a strong signal for future trade negotiations. We believe the choice is clear. Passing this bill will allow our producers to continue to deliver safe, nutritious, high-quality agricultural products and continue to feed the country for generations to come. Thank you. We look forward to answering your questions.
On to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. My time is limited, so I apologize in advance if I have to cut off your answers. I've got 2 questions, and I'll be ceding my time to Mr. Berthold. We heard testimony today that Canada negotiated 16 agreements without this bill, and we support supply management. So my first question is to CAFTA. You shared to not take existing FTAs for granted, which of course include protecting supply management. Can you briefly expand on this to you?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question. I might want to mention that our Executive Director, Claire CIIT, is with me here today, and she may want to elaborate on some of my answers. But yes, so some of the FTA or the deals that we've done so far has benefited not only the non-supply management sectors, but the supply management sectors as well. And we don't want to take those agreements for granted. We have to continue to move forward on trade deals that will expand the ability of our producers to expand their operations and feed the world, or feed Canada for sure. And we just feel that this C-216 bill will stop or inhibit the ability of our negotiators from doing just that.
Great, thank you very much. My next question is to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. We've heard that Bill C-216 could tie the hands of Canadian trade negotiators, if not completely show our hand. And so what risks would there be during trade negotiations to all agriculture sectors if that were to happen? To you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to take the questions. And, you know, we have to be able to sit down with our trading nations and at times, of course, to negotiate new trade deals as well as to update older ones. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to effectively engage in those conversations. And as you can imagine, if we take a number of everybody's sensitive products right off the table, right off the hop, this is certainly going to limit the ambition of trade agreements. And this is particularly detrimental when we have to focus on economic recovery following COVID-19.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Now over to my colleague, Mr. Berthold.
Merci beaucoup à ma collègue.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is for Mr. Lampron. So how does this work?
Mr. Lampron, talk to us.
When we're talking about these agreements, what happens at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture? Because if we look at disagreements in different sectors, how does this happen? And how do you try to convince your colleagues that a bill such as Bill C-216 is good for the future of agriculture throughout the country? Thank you for your question. It's a really good question, and this does lead to lively debate. But I think that we are all business people, and we're able to find a solution. So we have so many things in common. We want to preserve the environment, feed people, be able to earn a living. And so there are many files that we agree on, and we have many common points. So as my colleague was saying, we have nothing against trade. It's just that the last 3 trade agreements, we really paid for this. There were a lot of concessions made, and this is enough. And it's also been told that we have to keep security and hope for the next generations. People make promises. Even the bill was voted on. Over 250 MPs are supporting the bill, so this leads to hope, and we need concrete action to support the bill. Some of my colleagues don't support it, but I think that we would be able to live with it.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, a brief question. You have 35 seconds, Mr. Berthold.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Lamplon, Mr. Gobet, the Conservative Party supports supply management, and right now it's never had as much support by the party leaders. Right, very quickly, do you have any news from the government with regards to compensation for the CUSMA?
On est tout le temps.
We're still discussing. We don't have anything concrete. The door is always open. Discussions are underway.
Thank you. On to Mr. Dhaliwal, please, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I'll pass it on to Parliamentary Secretary Ms. Van Duyn, please. And if there's time left, I'll put a question.
Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et je remercie.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for giving me this precious time. Thank you to all the witnesses. This is a very important discussion that we're having today, and we're going to continue this discussion over several meetings. My first question is for Mrs. CIIT and her colleague. As you know, our government has committed to not making any more concessions on supply management during future trade negotiations. We do recognize that this is fundamental for our farmers, and this is why we did make this commitment. Here in Quebec, where I am, over 10,000 dairy farms are being supported directly and indirectly. And what I wanted to hear you speak to, Mrs. CIIT, is that I know that you and the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance have some concerns with regards to the bill. I should understand from your presentation and through your answers that you're talking about issues with regards to future trade agreements. Are you concerned for other sectors, for other agri-food sectors? Could we not do two things at once? What is your opinion on this? I'll give you the floor, Mrs. CIIT.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I'll begin by answering in French, and then I'll switch. So to reiterate that we are speaking on behalf of our members. At CAFTA, we're speaking on behalf of our members only. The first point that I would like to mention is perhaps a reminder. I don't think that anyone will forget it's very difficult to reopen trade negotiations. We saw this with the new NAFTA. It can be easy, actually, to ask for a free trade agreement be reopened. And so it's something that is possible, and we have to take this into account. I will now answer in English.
Add to Dan Darling's comments earlier on is I think it's important to remember that trade policy is very much about technical discussions and political discussions. Both need to happen very much in parallel and at some point come together to conclude deals. We very much see this happening right now in the whole vaccine situation, as well as in the CETA context. Even though the deal has been signed, ratified, and implemented, our members, it's not a surprise to any of you, but continue to endure technical issues that hinder our exports. Therefore, there's a need to continue the technical discussions, but very much the political efforts as well to remove the barriers for our exporters. And if you limit the ability of the negotiators and the government to maneuver pre-conclusion, but also post-implementation, this could be problematic. We could be in a situation where non-tariff barriers could see no resolution, and that would be really problematic. Dan, perhaps you want to add to this?
Thanks, Claire. No, I think Claire, for the most part, answered that question really well. Obviously, to handcuff for negotiators when right off the hop when they go into negotiations would be extremely detrimental. I just foresee, for an example, if we had we're working out a deal with a European country or whatever, that beef, for an example, was one of the things that they took right off the table, right off the bat. What would be the reason for for a lot of these negotiations to continue. So, we have to be, our negotiators have to be mindful of all the deals that they make and do things in the best interest of all of our producers.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry the time is up. Ms. Bendayan, on to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à l'ensemble des témoins qui sont parmi nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you to all the witnesses that are with us today. It was interesting to hear Mr. Lampro speak because we represent Quebec, but you also represent the dairy farmers as well as supply management. And it's really important for Quebec. And you also represent dairy farmers throughout Canada. So it was quite interesting to hear your comments. And so you spoke to...
It was interesting to hear you talked about the use of the bill. Would you say go so far as...
Would you qualify it as being necessary at this point, this bill? Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, this is a necessary bill. It's very important. And I'm not speaking on behalf of Quebec. I'm speaking on behalf of Canada. Some provinces are more minority, as my colleague was saying. In Quebec, dairy production is huge, but in other provinces, there are smaller producers, and it's really important for them. So for the future generations, if we want a prosperous industry, there's a lot of investing that's happening, and we want this to continue, and that is why this bill is so crucial. Thank you, Mr. Lampron. I'll give the rest of my time to Yves Perrault, my colleague. Thank you. Thank you, Simon Pierre. Thank you to all the witnesses. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate your presence. I would like to continue with Mr. Lampron. I'd like to thank everyone for their testimony, but when we hear the requests being made to refuse CIIT 216, they're being asked to keep supply management to be able to negotiate it, to use it as a bargaining chip. Am I understanding this correctly, Mr. Lampron, Mr. Gobin? I'll begin. This is what we hear, and this is why the bill is important to us. We hear this through our MPs, and they say, don't worry, we're always negotiating. And many countries, all countries are defending specific sectors. This is not nothing new, and it doesn't stop negotiation, but I think it's important. I think we've made a lot of concessions, and I think that we need to support the bill. I'll give the floor to Daniel. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Yes, to add to that, we're not against trade. Let's be clear. But our supply management allows to answer to the Canadian market, and we saw this. We saw that with the cheese quota, we went from 17,700 tons. We're talking about 17 million kilos of cheese that arrives in Canada with the best revenue for dairy farms. The promises for other sectors was access to the EU, access to European consumers. A lot of production, they're still waiting to feel the effects of these trade agreements because there are other barriers, other tariff barriers were imposed in order to hinder trade. So this is why we have a certain reserve in conceding anything without any guarantee for other sectors. Thank you. Let's understand this. Can you explain, Mr. Gobet, how will supply management stop working if we continue making concessions? Because we do control the quantities produced, the price, delivery. Could you speak to this? What is the consequence? We don't pass CIIT 216. There's another agreement in 2 or 3 years. Other concessions are made. What could happen? Well, you saw it. We heard a lot of business owners today speak. A business that doesn't have growth in the market for us, growth is according to the Canadian needs and with supply management. So for the past 2, 3, 4 years, all of the growth has been given to foreign countries through trade agreements. And so at the farm, investments are very difficult to make. How can we invest? There's too much uncertainty. And all of the growth has been given away as concessions. And for several years to come, it's been given to foreign countries. So to end, I'd like to hear you speak to how do you hear these, what do you think when politicians are promising to protect supply management, but then they hesitate to do it through a bill such as this one? Well, we've had really good support from many political parties, and we hear a lot of promises during the election campaign, but this bill, yes, it would solidify the commitment of parties with regards to the dairy farmers of Canada. Thank you.
On to Mr. Blakey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I believe I heard in the testimony of Mr. Darling at one point, he said that Bill C-216 would be in breach of or violate some existing trade rules. It caught me by surprise only because I'm not aware of any rules that would, prohibit a country from determining in advance what's, on the table or off the table in terms of a trade negotiation. But I wonder if he could confirm whether I heard him right in that respect, and if so, if he could highlight where that rule is, if it's at the WTO or just kind of give us a little more clarity about what that rule might be.
Perhaps I can jump in.
Thank you for the
in
question.
here.
Yes, Claire.
If you allow me to jump in here very quickly, sorry, Dan, but this would contradict trade negotiating principles. I just wanted to add that comment here. Dan, please go ahead.
No, that was that was going to be my answer to the question anyway. Is that's where it would contradict trade rules.
So a rule or a principle, and where would we find an enunciation of the principles that you're talking about?
I guess it would be principle, and I guess I can't answer that question fully right now. So unless Claire can.
I think perhaps the best to answer those type of questions are the negotiators themselves. Those are willing and dealing the deals at the negotiating table. But essentially, it's a matter of reciprocity and setting a precedent. If you look at the TPP negotiations, I think there were some comments earlier about this today. But when Japan entered the deal right from the onset, it wanted to exclude 5 products, agricultural products, that are in Canada's key offensive interests. That's beef, pork, grains, rice, and sugar. There's no way we would have gone. Canada would have achieved a comprehensive agreement had Japan not agreed to put those products back on the table. This is a matter of allowing negotiators and the government to have the ability to seek the best agreement for Canada.
Now, I mean, as it happens, I think it's important to note that the current government has said that under no circumstances would they cede any further market share in dairy. So in this case, the law wouldn't be doing anything that the government hasn't said that it's already going to do at the negotiating table. Monsieur Taillon, entre-temps, je me demande si peut-être vous êtes...
Mr. Taillon, are you aware of any regulation that this bill would go against? Is there a regulation somewhere that says that a government or a legislator cannot decide ahead of time that such and such an industry or regulatory regime would not be part of a trade negotiation for a free trade agreement? It's for me, this question? Yes. Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blakey. So there is no such regulation. The Parliament can give a great margin of maneuver and can limit it. And on the other hand, there's nothing that cannot be reversed. If Parliament decides today something, if Parliament decides something today, the Parliament of tomorrow can undo it. So with my understanding of Bill C-216, it's a way of increasing the power of negotiating of the negotiators if they say, okay, if we look at supply management right now, the current Parliament of Canada does not allow me to make these types of concessions. So then you would have to go again before the Parliament of Canada to obtain permission or some sort of a amendment. So there's no regulation that stops the Parliament from limiting what can be negotiated by the department. But this protection doesn't mean that in the future it could be reversed by another parliament. The parliament of tomorrow, if necessary, could always review. It's a way of parliament to take back a type of control, to inject a type of transparency, of democracy, to make sure that if the executive wants to venture in this direction, they would have to go before Parliament again and request the changes, request permission for the changes. If the bill is passed, there will be, well, to create an exception, we'll have to come back to Parliament. Okay, so.
Ellen, sorry, Mr. Blakey, your time is up. I want to thank our witnesses for the very valuable information you provided today. I'm sure you're going to monitor as the proceedings continue over the next few days as well. So thank you to the witnesses, to my colleagues. We need to sign off and join into the in-camera session for the next half hour of our meeting. So if you could please do that as quickly as possible. And again, thank you to the witnesses for being here.
you.